And that is where we start our discussion this morning on Standing on Guard. We are talking about security matters. We'll also focus on page 6 of the Daily Nation. Let me introduce my guest real quick, starting from my immediate left. Professor Peter Kagwanja is with us, Chief Executive, Africa Policy Institute. Thanks for making time for us. Professor Midamba is also here with us, Defense and Foreign Policy Expert and also VC KCA. Thanks for making time for us. Dr. Mustafa Ali, Conflict Resolution and Security Expert, is also with us. And Dr. Hassan Khannenje, Director, Horn Institute, which is International Institute for Strategic Studies. Thanks for making time for us. As soon as Major Retired Peter Mwinyi comes in, we'll just usher him in and straight into the discussion. Professor Kagwanja, I'll start with you. What was your reaction when you saw that attack on journalists within a place that is supposed to be secured? And then the response from the leaders is that the people who attacked the journalists were totally uninvited.
First and foremost, I think the chicken are coming home to roost because we've been saying that NASA is adopting a stridently violent approach to politics. It is basically exiting the rule of law and entering to another terrain where you're using violence. And then what has confronted us is the argument that NASA, it is within the rights of NASA to protest, to picket, to go to the streets. That is provided for in our Constitution. I think we've been debating between two things. One, the right to protest, to the freedom of expression and freedom to do what you want to do, which is provided for by our Constitution. But we have not touched on the obligation to other citizens that you need to be responsible. You cannot use acts of violence. Now, 10% of our population did not vote in this country. That comprised of about 2,220,000 Kenyans. Why? Because of total violence, some of it so heinous you don't want to mention it online. Yet, you were told the election was boycotted. How can you boycott if you are beaten not to participate in election? So what happened to the media is a wake-up call to the media to begin to turn to reason in regard to listening to those who are saying, hey, we are moving towards a violent winter here.
Okay. Professor Midamba, do you buy the argument, the explanation that the youth who are there were totally uninvited? Because we've seen certain situations whereby the youth are just appear from nowhere. They may not be invited, but then their actions reflect on the leaders.
Trevor, let me take a global view on this than my friend Peter here. Mm-hmm. And that is Sir Winston Churchill once said that democracy is the worst form of government except for others that have been tried. And I want to give you examples of some heroes that happened this past week and how we, the people, we Kenyans, need to think. Professor Nyang' Nyong'o and Paul Chemkoni of Kericho and also Kisumu joined together from different parties. And they walked through and drove through that zone where there was real conflict. It's going to happen. And they diffuse it. So in my opinion, Professor Nyang' Nyong'o and Paul Chemkoni became the heroes. Real heroes is a mechanic in Kisumu who was a victim of police brutality and turned around and fixed the vehicle for 3 hours, free. Real heroes are a group of young people who helped the water cannon tank that almost overturned in Kisumu, and they brought it back on the road. This is not the time to blame anyone. It is the time for soul searching, for the betterment of our country. We are Kenyans. We are the people. We are the one who is going to determine where we go from now.
Okay. Mustafa, what was your reaction when you saw the attack on journalists?
Yeah, let me, Trevor, let me begin by saying that non-violence is the mightiest and greatest weapon for anybody who wishes to have societies evolve and develop into communities that are respectful of one another and are moving forward. And this is what many of the Asian tigers have been doing for many years. Now, what we saw on television last night and heard with regard to those basically thugs, hoodlums, who appeared at NASA headquarters and slapped a journalist at Wiper,
yeah.
at Wiper headquarters, slapped a journalist, beat up Gachuri, just because of the perception that NTV or Citizen or KBC are pro NASA cannot be excused. And equally, the casual manner with which the principals of the NASA apologized is something that they need to think twice. They need to apologize properly. Now, when we normalize violence in that manner, and this seems to be the way Kenya has been structured by certain people, and we're moving towards that, it's going to be extremely difficult for this country. When in the presence of cameras, hoodlums would just walk to a person who would be having a name that sounds or appears to not belong to their tribe, is something that is akin to us moving to the warlord democracy proper. And we have to watch against some of these actions. They might be actions of a few now, but violence has an infectious effect on people, and this has to be stopped. I would like to see the NASA principals coming out clearer than they have and apologize. To the individual journalists, to the media houses where these journalists came from, and to the Editors Guild directly, and to the Journalist Association in this country.
All right. Dr. Hassan?
Yeah, Trevor, thanks. By accident of history and the design of geography, we find ourselves in this beautiful land called Kenya. We didn't apply to be part of it,
yeah,
but it so happened. And after independence, we decided to stay within those borders as communities and as Kenyans and try to work on sense of nationhood. Now, we were bequeathed this country by our forefathers, by men and women who fought valiantly to ensure that there's a Kenyan dream. And today our country stands at a crossroads, and anyone who doesn't see that is either blind or they're dishonest. A key ingredient of democracy or democratic rule is free media. Being able is the engine that actually drives democratic practices. And the toxic, in fact, that attack underscores the effects of the toxic nature of the rhetoric that has been going on in the country. And it's about time that all political leaders and people from the political, both sides of the political divide, tone down the rhetoric, but also speak very clearly, in very clear terms, non-certain terms, about the essence of certain things that are critical to survival of this polity. Without that, and without free media and our journalists being able to practice as they choose, we cannot really have this democratic project called Kenya.
Okay. Professor Kagwanja, are we facing a problem here? Because most of the time, one of the biggest challenges has always been administering footage as evidence. Should there be a restructuring of the security system, in your opinion? Because they say now that they will try and get the people who are involved, but we have them on camera.
I don't think, I think there is more of condoning and tolerance of that violence than anything else. Now, let me take you through a very quick historical account of this. If you go from 1991, we got what we are calling state-sponsored violence. A lot of commissions, like Kumi commissions and others, were formed to deal with this. In 2007, the country almost fell apart. And the argument was the election was stolen. How many elections are stolen in the world and people don't go to that level? You go to the institutions and seek remedy within the institutions. We condoned it and instead sought solutions from elsewhere, which is, can we have a power sharing arrangement so that we deal with this violence? We did not address the root causes of the violence. In January, in full glare of cameras, the so-called men in black attacked people in a stadium. The people are known, the individuals were identified by cameras, and no action was taken at all. We went to Migori and got the so-called men in white. And they attacked people again in full glare of the camera. And nobody took any measure. Yeah. Now, in the last 3 weeks, we have seen people in full glare of the camera holding boulders and heavy logs, while welding. Somebody has the audacity to go to a machine, to get a welding machine and weld the gates of polling stations, welding it. Another one kills a dog and hangs it on the gate of the polling station. Yeah. It is abhorrent. Yet, it is not that the individuals are not known. It is not that the identity, the political identity of those individuals are known, but they are supporters of key untouchables.
So who's condoning the violence here? Is it the political class or the security? Because they also have the footage of the people involved.
Sure. First, there is the idea that if you touch a person, you have touched a political movement. Therefore, you don't want to get the unlevering of the entire society because you are victimizing supporters of certain leader. I think the culpability should go straight to Raila Odinga. He needs to rein in his goons. Listen to this. He goes on to public and announced that he has launched a resistance movement. Trevor, go to any dictionary, even the weakest, don't go to Oxford or whatever, and check the word resistance, what it means. It is literally means of violence. That's all. It means that you have exited the Constitution. Simple and clear. It means that you are going to adopt extra legal mechanism. What we sometimes call, when we are accusing the police, we talk about, extrajudicial killing. This is extra legal violence. What we are calling informal violence, coached in human rights language, with the purpose of basically intimidating, disturbing public order, and that's it. Okay. So I think we need to be bold enough and ask Raila Odinga to declare whether he really wanted to play within democracy or he wants to play within the act of violence.
Okay. Professor Midamba, and I know you don't want to portion blame here on anyone like you mentioned earlier, but is that your reading as well? Does resistance necessarily mean violence? And who is to blame in this case? Because we provide the footage. Are we blaming the political parties or the police who are not acting on the footage they've been given?
Trevor, in times like this, events and things happen where no one has any control over. Muvumbi Sebino, writing about Rwanda genocide in 1994, basically wrote to Kenya and said, "Dear Kenya," and in one of the example he gave is that his auntie was married to a Tutsi and was murdered by the husband. The husband murdered the woman he loved and murdered his children because they had Tutsi blood in them. Act like that are not natural. They happen in a situation like this. Now let me return to the police and the intelligence network we have. There is a very clear law on how to capture these goons that take advantage of any situation that we have. And it doesn't matter where they come from. Whenever times like this, these people are going to come out. They either break the stores and steal furniture or kill people and maim people. They're using these are opportunists. And therefore we need to use penetrating intelligent network to figure out who is who and who is doing what. Nip them and lock them out where they belong.
Okay.
That's what we need to do as a law enforcement agent.
Okay, before I bring Dr. Mustafa on the same, the Major retired Peter Mwinyi is joining us now, so ex-serviceman and security expert as well. Thanks for making time. And so I'll start with you. In retrospect, where's the missing link between the police and the political parties? Because in this event, we saw an attack on journalists within a supposedly secure environment. But the explanation there is that they were not invited. However, we do have them on footage. Where's the missing link here? Is it that we need to restructure the police system to be more responsive, or what happens? Or is there undue influence from the political leaders?
Trevor, thank you so much. Let me first thank my panelists, and I'm sorry that I've come late. And let me say that it is so unfortunate that our country right now, it is in the situation in which we are. And the right thing before I answer your question is not to blame anybody here.
Yeah.
Is try and first and foremost to look for solutions. And I think when we come here, we are privileged to be on this platform to direct our nation on the way forward in terms of peace.
Yeah.
It is very unfortunate that our country is going through this. I personally, I have fought to defend this country with my life, and I wouldn't wish to see these things. As regard to the police, police are there, embedded in our constitution to defend our country, to defend the citizens. But our politicians, Trevor, they are the ones who are bringing us to this conflict between the policemen who are supposed to take care of us. And more so, the public, I'm sorry to say this, we forget that these policemen, again, they are the ones who take care of us. But I get perturbed when I see a citizen throwing a stone to a policeman who maybe he has a lot of stress in one way or the other. He's not an angel. Yeah. He can react. However, they are trained to exercise minimum force when they're encountering such things. Yeah. Now, the link here, where we are missing the link, it is our politicians. And Trevor, today, I feel so, my heart is down, completely down. After serving this country for 33 years with other soldiers and other eminent people who have sacrificed their life, and they are not here with us today. Yeah. And we are seeing this situation. Why? Because of the politicians. If the politicians can tone down the rhetoric of bringing tribalism, yeah, I think we would be fine where we are.
All right.
The policemen, we are asking them, let them exercise the minimum force they can use on our citizens. But our citizens also, through our politicians, they should know that these are the same people we can run to in times of problem. Yeah. When we have a cohesion between the police and the citizens, things will be well. But our politicians should not try to put oil into already burning fire. Okay. And that is what is happening. Okay. And then they blame the policemen. Right. Please, our youth out there, I'm appealing to you, let us have that harmony. Okay. Harmony within the police force, within any other security agents, so that we can save our country. Okay. That is my prayer.
All right. Dr. Mustafa, what do you read into, when you hear of a resistance movement, do you also read violence? And you've also had what retired Major is bringing up, the cohesion between the public and the police. People are supposed to protect you, but at the same time, they're the ones who you're fighting. So where is the balance? It's a confused concoction of things.
Trevor, it's how people act, it's how a coalition or a political party acts that, yeah, that will define whether that resistance is violent or non-violence. Now, resistance basically means the refusal to accept or comply with something. Yeah. That's the basic primary meaning of resistance, and I'm actually reading that from a dictionary. Yeah. Now, the refusal to, the pause to refuse or not to comply with something can either be non-violent or violent. Now, and I started by saying that it is how the political coalitions or actors act in their resistance. If it is non-violent, yeah, that's okay. But if it is non-violent and refusing to comply with the law, that is illegal. If it is violent, then that's totally off, it will take us to much deeper political crisis. Now, in the context of the Kenyan politics, and we said this many times, General has said very passionately here about the kind of things that we are seeing, the violence. Now, in our context, Trevor, in our the political context that we have here is that we are practicing juvenile politics. Most of the political leaders, and I want to repeat, most of the political leaders, the brand of politics that they are practicing is juvenile. It is not issue-driven. It is based on no ideology whatsoever other than to access power or to get power by any means necessary. And this is why you'll find some hoodlums appearing in a party's headquarters to go and slap journalists, trying to normalize violence. And that's where we take great exception. And for me, resistance can be violent, it could be non-violent. The kind of a population that we are dealing with, the hate that we've seen from hate mongers doing rounds around the country, I am afraid that that resistance could easily become violent. And that is where now the political leaders have to take a higher ground platform and be morally inclined to rein in their supporters. That when you can disagree with anything, you know, people didn't go and vote, that's their right, and that's okay. But don't resist and start throwing stones. Don't complying with the rule of law is mandatory in this country. Don't refuse and then throw stones at me. You can worship that stone if you want to be, if that is your God, but don't throw it at another Kenyan, or don't throw it at me.
Dr. Hassan, and this is one thing that Professor Kagwanja brought up, the right to protest and obligation to other citizens. That thin line is where we seem to cross over either side all the time. How do we make sure that doesn't happen? Your right to protest is enjoyed, but also you make sure that whoever is protesting doesn't cross over into the other side of the citizens also and infringe on their rights in reverse now.
Yeah, I have about 3 things to say. I'll probably first start with Professor Midamba's. It is important to not to apportion blame at this stage. As they say, to whom much is given, much is expected. The fact that we have this platform here, it means a lot is expected from us. We should not be fanning the flames, but we should be healing the wounds. Now, rights come with responsibilities. As a citizen, under the Bill of Rights, you enjoy plenty of rights. However, we also have responsibility, and it comes with certain duties. The national resistance movement, if I have to use the word, from my own understanding about it, I think the problem is it wasn't qualified to what type of resistance it was going to be. Because I did a book on nonviolence and the comparative analysis of nonviolence between apartheid South Africa and occupied territories of Palestine, Israel, from the 1980s. And then, of course, other countries such as Poland and Philippines and the United States. There are about 200 plus methods of nonviolence resistance. In fact, a lot of what, for instance, was espoused recently by the opposition, actually they fall squarely within nonviolence resistance. Now, if they've been clearly defined as nonviolent, for instance, then there is actually no problem with that. So just because a social nonviolent movement, for instance, it does not mean it's about to topple government. Now, some of those nonviolent movements, like in the Philippines, they topple the government, in Poland and stuff like that. However, these are things and rights within the Constitution. They're the same rights that Dr. Martin Luther King, during the March to Washington, he talked about the fierce urgency of now that could have never been more relevant, especially with the time we're facing in Kenya. He used the same nonviolent methods actually to bring about change to the oppressed people of color in the United States. And so with rights comes responsibilities. However, we should not rush, and especially as opinion makers and leaders, to define people for what they are not, to legitimize things that are not, and to create the chasm that is unnecessary instead of trying to heal the wounds of a nation. We have that responsibility as a people to protect this country.
Okay. Professor Kagwanja and Dr. Hassan has brought it up. Even the NASA team also said this resistance movement is non-violent. It's an armed resistance movement. Are you not buying their argument, or do you believe that they'll still turn into violence?
Before the October 26 election, we see a series of activities that would be characterized as non-violent. Let me make it very clear here that among some of the things that have been given serious attention to, I tried to look for solution to violent movements like the Mungiki, which is part of what I have studied very closely. Is Mahatma Gandhi's Satyagraha. You can look at, they have invoked Martin Luther King and the non-violent. And Kwame Nkrumah would talk about the positive action. And here, what they were referring to is peaceful resistance movement. Not even movement, peaceful resistance in forms of protest, picketing, and so on. And all these took different forms, and the action by the government was also different. But the definition of a resistant movement has never changed. And this is it. A resistant movement is an organized effort by some portion of the civil population, civil population of a country to resort to to resist the legally established government or an occupying power, and to disrupt civil order and stability. That's what a resistant movement is described as. Now, the point here is that the force of a resistant movement can be directed against a government that you identify that in a country, or an occupying force. So the resistance we are talking about here, in terms of Mahatma Gandhi, in terms of Martin Luther, is basically there are two different things here. For Mahatma Gandhi, it's an occupying force, the British. For Martin Luther, it is an oppressive, or is a government that oppresses a certain section of society. What is not coming out clearly is why a resistant movement should rise in Kenya against a government that is not already installed. Even now as we speak, we have just a president-elect. We don't have a government as yet. In fact, the President Kenyatta currently cannot even form a government, new or old. He just is there. So in short, I think I refuse to be hoodwinked that the resistant movement here is the same protest that I saw before the election. This is new. I refuse to believe that what is happening is a disjointed, spontaneous reaction by hoodlums and goons. It is not. I refuse to believe that. I want to say that we have seen a systematic attack on civic population since the 26th. And since the announcement of the new idea of a resistance movement. We've seen supermarkets burnt in Kawangware. We have seen people dying in other parts of the country. I mean, that need to be investigated. And one want to ask, do we still have the political formations as we used to have them, which is Jubilee versus NASA, as two civic movements or civic groups or formations that are competing for power within the civic terrain? Or do we have one party, which is Jubilee, and a Kony-like Lord's Resistance Army resisting the government? That we need to boldly and courageously begin to engage that. I understand where my colleague is coming from, which is basically that we need to talk the language of peace. But as a scholar of conflict, I do know that Hitler would not have become a threat to the world had Chamberlain stood up and not adopted the appeasement policy. It requires a degree of courage, both moral and otherwise, to stand up to bullies and say enough is enough. Passivism is the main cause of chaos and instability in the world, because you hit the left, you give them the right cheek, at what point, and when all the cheek are gone, what are you going to give?
Okay. All right. I see there's a lot of reaction coming in from my guests, but I'll come to you in just a bit. And retired Major, you want to jump in before I take a break really briefly?
Trevor,
yes.
Today I'm very happy. I've been watching this program for a long time.
Yes.
Good. And the panelists here, who are my colleagues, they are not politicians. Although one would have a right to be affiliated to any party, when our politicians come here in this forum, you will see distinctively the affiliation, where they belong to, and that is not good. When the panelists come here, I would wish, we know the problem where it is right now, that maybe some ethnic groups don't feel comfortable in the sharing of this national cake, and other things. Yeah. But those aside, because now we are in a very awkward situation, we should be talking on the solutions, how we come out of this problem. This problem we have been put by our politicians. Yeah. What if, Trevor, today, the same politicians, right from the MCAs, right from our members of parliament, right from the senators, women rep, they go out with the same vigor, with the same energy that they went to campaign for whatever positions they wanted. Yeah. The media personnel, you're doing a good job. Go out there and preach nothing else. Not competitive politics, but peace. Our clergymen out there, in their sermons every Sunday, they preach nothing else but peace. Understand? Yeah. Know what I'm talking about? Yes. We don't need anybody from foreigners to come here. We don't need any resistance movement here. But you see, people have been pushed, maybe, to the wall, and the result of these things. All right. And I'm wondering where our statesmen, like Kibaki, like Mwinyi, to come up and talk something about peace in this country. Where are they? Where are they?
The loud silence of the statesmen.
What says, it is not about our honorable Raila, it is not about Uhuru, it is about the country. We had Mwinyi, we had Kibaki, they are gone. Please, Trevor, if this question of politics is very emotive, it can bring us to... I was in Rwanda in 2004. I stayed there for 1 year. I've just come from Eritrea as a military observer with the United Nations. I have seen what I've seen there. And I want to discuss that, and I don't wish at any one moment our country to drop there. All right. I am one of the officers who have captured Kismayu. I know with my servicemen and officers what we went through. Okay. All right. So our politicians should not play with our country. Okay. Let us take charge. All right. With our rhetoric words, with our actions. I want to look at Jaluo from there as my brother. Okay. I want to look at Kikuyu like my brother. Let us not be winked by the politicians. All right. They have their own initiative. Okay. Let us preach that. Okay. And when you do our programs here, let us go for solutions. Okay. Let us not go for who is who, what is NASA, what is Jubilee. And Hungry Wanjiku out there does not need Jubilee as a party. Okay. Our parties have been overridden by politics. All right, Major. They are no longer serving the purpose that the parties in this world ought to have. All right, Major. I have to take